Imagine a world where the Axis powers emerged victorious in World War II. Where would we be today if Nazi Germany had won? World War II, a global conflict that spanned from 1939 to 1945, was a cataclysmic event that reshaped the world as we know it. Millions of lives were lost, entire cities were reduced to rubble, and societies were forever altered. But what if the outcome had been different? What if Nazi Germany, alongside its Axis allies, had emerged victorious? In this alternate reality, the implications would have been global and profound. Europe, the crux of the conflict, would have been transformed under the iron grip of Nazi rule. Hitler's vision of a racially pure Aryan society would have been imposed, leading to unspeakable atrocities and cultural erasure on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. Beyond Europe, the effects would have rippled outwards. In the East, Japan, an Axis ally, might have solidified its control over much of Asia. The United States, despite its geographical distance, would not have been immune to the shock waves of this monumental shift in global power. This hypothetical scenario is deeply unsettling. It challenges our understanding of history and forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. It's a world where the values we hold dear, democracy, freedom, equality, could have been suppressed or extinguished. Yet it's important to remember that this is a what-if scenario, a thought experiment. The reality is that the Axis powers did not win World War II. The world we live in today, for all its flaws and challenges, was shaped by the victory of the Allied forces. But exploring these alternate histories can help us better understand our own world. They can shine a light on the forces that shape societies, the decisions that alter the course of history, and the resilience of humanity in the face of adversity. Now, let's delve into a hypothetical timeline, where the world map was redrawn by the Axis powers. 1945, a year that could have marked the beginning of a new era under the Nazi regime. The world as we knew it would have been reshaped by the iron fist of the Axis powers, with Germany at the helm. The immediate aftermath of this unthinkable victory would have seen a world dramatically different from the one we know today. Imagine the map of Europe redrawn by the victorious Nazis. Major cities, once vibrant hubs of culture and history, would have become centers of the Nazi regime. The territorial expansions would have been vast, with Germany annexing large parts of Eastern Europe and establishing puppet states in conquered territories. Countries that once prided themselves on their autonomy would have become mere extensions of Nazi Germany. But it's not just Europe that would have been affected. The ripple effects of an Axis victory would have been felt across the globe. Major world powers such as the United States and the Soviet Union would have had to navigate this new Axis-led world order. The United States, which had been relatively untouched by the war, might have found itself isolated, standing alone against the Nazi behemoth. The Soviets, having suffered a catastrophic defeat, would have been forced to relinquish vast territories and resources to the Nazis. The Axis victory would have also had an immense impact on the decolonization process. Countries across Africa and Asia, which were just beginning to break free from colonial rule, might have found themselves under the yoke of a new form of imperialism. The hopes and dreams of independence would have been crushed under the jackboot of the Nazi regime. In this alternate 1940s, the world would have been a place of uncertainty and fear. The ideals of freedom and democracy would have been replaced by the dark, oppressive rule of the Nazis. The cultural, social, and political fabric of the planet would have been irrevocably altered. As we move into the 1950s, the world continues to adjust to the new Axis-led order. The 1950s, a decade of consolidation and expansion for the victorious Nazi regime. The 50s would have been a time of solidification for the Nazi regime, a period to cement its triumph and to extend its reach. Imagine a world where the Nazi Party, having emerged victorious from the war, begins to consolidate its power. The regime, drunk on victory, would have likely imposed its totalitarian rule not only across Europe, but sought to extend its influence globally. In this altered reality, the Cold War would have taken a dramatically different shape. Instead of a standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union, we would likely see a tripartite power struggle, with Nazi Germany as the third player. The world would have been divided into spheres of influence, with each of these superpowers vying for control. the Nazis would have been faced with the challenge of managing the conquered territories. This could have resulted in a policy of aggressive Germanization, or perhaps a more pragmatic approach aiming to pacify the occupied nations through a combination of repression and collaboration. In terms of global politics, the Nazi regime would have sought to reshape international institutions in its image. The United Nations, if it existed at all, would have been a vastly different entity. Imagine a world where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was replaced by a Nazi-inspired doctrine of racial purity and supremacy. Culturally, the 1950s under Nazi rule would have been a time of great change. Nazi ideology would have permeated every aspect of life, from education and entertainment to the arts and sciences. We would likely see a world where propaganda was the norm and dissent was ruthlessly quashed. But even under such a regime, resistance would have continued. Across the world, brave individuals and groups would have fought against the Nazi rule, constantly challenging the regime and keeping the flame of freedom alive. Moving into the 1960s, the world under Nazi rule continues to evolve. The 1960s could have seen the height of Nazi influence reach across the globe. This decade would have been a time of significant change and upheaval, as the world was reshaping itself in the aftermath of World War II. Imagine, if you will, the Nazi regime grappling with the wave of decolonization that swept across Africa and Asia. With their imperialist mindset, it's likely they would have sought to maintain control over these regions. Yet, the spirit of independence was strong, and many newly formed nations would have resisted Nazi control, leading potentially to a series of conflicts and struggles for power. Meanwhile, in the United States, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, fighting against racial segregation and discrimination. Under Nazi rule, the movement's progress may have been stifled, or perhaps even reversed. Yet, just as with decolonization, the yearning for freedom and equality was a powerful force. It's possible that a different kind of resistance movement would have emerged, one driven not just by African Americans, but by all those oppressed under the Nazi regime. And then there was the space race. As nations competed to be the first to land a man on the moon, the Nazis would likely have thrown their considerable resources into this contest. In our history, the space race was a symbol of national pride and technological achievement. In this alternate timeline, it could have become a horrifying demonstration of Nazi dominance, a chilling reminder of their control over the planet and beyond. Yet, even as the Nazis sought to assert their control on Earth and in space, the seeds of resistance would have been sown. The 1960s could have been a time of intense struggle, but also of hope, as people across the world fought for their freedom and their rights. As we approach the end of the 20th century, the world under Nazi rule has become unrecognizable. But the human spirit is resilient, and even in the darkest times, the light of resistance can never be fully extinguished. Fast forward to the present day, where the legacy of a Nazi victory still shapes our world. Imagine a world where the ideologies and policies of Nazi Germany continue to permeate throughout the globe. In this alternate timeline, the political landscape would be vastly different. Dictatorial governments might be the norm, with individual freedoms and democratic principles taking a back seat. The United Nations, as we know it, might not exist, replaced by a global regime that upholds the tenets of totalitarianism and racial supremacy. Culturally, this world would reflect a starkly different reality. Art, literature, music and film might be heavily censored, manipulated to serve the propaganda of the ruling regime. Diversity in cultural expression, which we celebrate today, could be suppressed, making way for a homogenized, state-controlled narrative. The social landscape too would be dramatically altered. The civil rights movements that shaped our societies in the second half of the 20th century might never have occurred. The fight for racial equality, gender equality, and LGBTQ rights, which have made significant strides in our timeline, might be non-existent in this alternate world. Instead, a rigid social hierarchy, dictated by the principles of the Nazi doctrine, could prevail. In the realm of science and technology, progress might be skewed towards military advancements, with the possibility of a space race being replaced by an arms race. Environmental considerations, which form the crux of our current scientific discourse, might be completely overlooked. This alternate reality is a chilling thought, isn't it? It underscores the importance of the choices that have been made in our history. The brave men and women who fought against the forces of totalitarianism and bigotry ensured that our world took a different path. It is a reminder of the power of resistance, the strength of ideals, and the resilience of the human spirit. This hypothetical timeline gives us a glimpse into a chilling alternate reality, underscoring the importance of remembering history and the choices that have shaped our world.